Well, hello all. Welcome to this updated twist on the Wednesday night Bible studies that you may have grown up with. Tonight, Reverend David and Anthony Cruz will offer readings from the Hebrew and Christian scriptures that make up the Bible. We'll cover some Judeo-Christian basics and explore the Bible themes, contradictions, and curiosities. Today, we will talk through Acts 17 and get our philosophy on. It is time for Paul to duke it out with some Stoics. So let's kick off this philosophical discussion. And what better to get us started than something on tap? Well, David, what do we have tonight?
Hey, my faith-based brew tonight is Rainmaker. It is a red IPA, and of course, rainmaking is definitely something you got to have faith in, right? And this is from St. Louis Park, Minnesota, right up the road from me, and it's a very, very good ale. So cheers to that. Yes, I have faith in Rainmaker now.
Definitely. So we have with us a special guest. Let's go ahead and bring him up on the screen here. Anthony, welcome to Bibles and Beer.
Good evening, Justice, and great to see you, Reverend David. I'm really excited to have a conversation tonight, join you in Bibles and Beer. I myself am not drinking alcohol, but I'm drinking this very sweet drink, and kind of wanted to bring it in. It's a malt beverage, and given that we're going to be talking about some tension, critiques, observations about the Bible and controversies, what better than to be controversial drinking this brand?
It did cause some controversy during the election year. Yes, you are right. Very good. Very good. Well, shall we get right at it and see where we get to? I wanted to think a little bit for those who haven't really done much Bible study. I haven't had the ability or the joys or the challenges of doing some Bible study in universities, theological schools. There's this thing called hermeneutics. Anthony, you want to tell us a little bit about hermeneutics?
Sure. So basically, hermeneutics has to do with the engagement and interpretation of text, right? From if we're using the Britannica.com as a basis and not necessarily wanting to use maybe theological resources, right? But kind of tapping into what's accessible for, let's quote, the lay person, somebody that might not have access to higher education in theology. Hermeneutics has to do with how we decide, based on the resources that we have available, to interpret the text that we're willing to engage. And in this case, it would be biblical text, right? And so when we talk about hermeneutics, we're basically engaging in a traditional understanding of hermeneutics in four possible dimensions. One is the literal, right? That which comes and is interpreted just looking at the plain text. Yep. Then we have the moral dimension that has to do with what is the text implying? What is the message that potentially those authors really wanted to communicate to the readers? And then we have the allegorical, which in my opinion is one of the favorite modes, particularly in believing circles, which is looking at the meaning behind the meaning or the context that is hidden within the text. And then there's a fourth one, which I would say, in my opinion, might not necessarily equate in Christian understanding, but then it's the anagogical, right, which is the mystical, predominantly utilized, for example, within Jewish texts, right, looking at Kabbalah and looking at the Zohar and other texts, which is really looking at numerology, right, and looking at the equation of like words, text, phrases, in order to find a more authentic meaning revealed by the divine. Which again, I think that would complicate things with Christians, right? Because you might be getting into magic or mysticism.
Yeah.
But at least in a really quick survey, those are some of the 4 traditional modes of understanding hermeneutics. And then maybe as we unfold in dialogue and conversation, I might add more contemporary lenses.
Good. All right. Yes. Well, let us get the text up here, and we'll take some looks. I'm very sorry. We do seem to be having some problems today. YouTube itself seems to be broken down, so we'll see how that works. I hope people are able to get through.
So just to get, for those people who are catching this after the fact, which I'm assuming a lot of you will, I'm so sorry that you guys weren't able to join on in. We will work with it. I have this being recorded in multiple places, so we will have it up for you guys to watch and see after the fact.
Okay, very good. Thanks so much, Tech Guru Justice. Thank you. This is from Acts 17, verses 19 through 34. I mentioned the book of Acts last week. It's written by the same person who wrote the book of Luke, although Luke didn't write Luke, but it's about the early Christian journey as Christianity spread out across the Roman Empire. So in this particular bit, it's around 50 of the Common Era. The Gospels are not out in the world yet, but we do have Paul wandering around various places talking about this new idea called Christianity. And here he finds himself in Athens. So they took him, Paul, and brought him to the Areopagus, which means the hill of Ares, or Mars Hill, the god of war. And you see the picture there. It's a large rock outcrop, all right? So it's an open area for speaking. All right. And they ask him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? It sounds rather strange to us, so we would like to know what it means. Now, very interesting. We are in ancient Athens, the home of Western philosophy for centuries. And the people there are saying, Paul, we hear about this. Come on, dude, tell us about it. This is not a photo, by the way, but a 16th century rendering of this particular scene. Now, all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. Now, that's kind of cool, isn't it? That we have this entire city of citizens and visitors who are doing nothing with their time but doing philosophy outside, okay, in the Stoa, in the marketplace. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. Extremely religious. Now, think about that. And it can be negative or positive, today certainly, but then as well. What kind of extreme are you? I see you're extremely religious. You are in every way. For as I went through the city, I looked carefully at the objects of your worship. I found among them an altar with the inscription, to an unknown God. All right, so they're trying to cover all of their God bases, even to the point of having some kind of an altar to an unknown God. Now, I should parenthetically mention that this has never been found to exist. So this may be a figment of the writer's imagination. But in the book of Acts, we have these very set and carefully constructed speeches. Luke is, or whoever Luke is Paul's speechwriter as we go through there. So it may or may not be true that this actually happened. The God who made the world and everything in it. So I'm going to tell you, all right, about this person, about this God. And I'm going to proclaim to you, the God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth. Adam and Eve story, yeah. And he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he is not far from each one of us, being a very Christian interpretation that God is everywhere at all times. Now a very interesting passage occurs, and Paul is very clearly saying, this is a quotation, "For," says Paul, quote, "in him we live and move and have our being." Now this quote is attributed to this gentleman, Poseidonitis. It's a little hard to get out there. Who lives somewhere 100 to 200 years before this is being written. He was a Syrian poet and Stoic philosopher, this is important later, who miscalculating the correct circumference of the earth by less than 900 miles. So he was also a mathematician. The Stoics already were monotheists. This is a misinterpretation of where the basic Roman and Greek worlds were at this particular time period. They were already mostly monotheistic, but Zeus had been the monotheistic god. So, in whom we live and move and have our being. And I want to hand it off to Anthony here to reflect on that a little bit. Anthony.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I guess that I would love to reflect again, not necessarily from a purely theological framework, but mainly just flirting with some of the historical, biblical context, but at the same time, what are some of the threads that maybe we can gather, right? That we can kind of extrapolate from the text and how that relates to us as humanists, right? I particularly, when I was a Christian in my younger age, prior to college, I really loved this text because it really painted a picture for me, right? As you just quoted, in whom we move, exist, and have our being.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, pre-college, right? So I no theological understanding, no background in anthropology, theology, or philosophy, nonetheless, right?
Right.
But these three phrases of movement, existence, existing, and being are definitely in nature, from an ontological understanding, philosophical.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So if we look at the chapter 17 and broader into the book of Acts, and we place it in a historical context, we see, if I'm not mistaken, is after the depth of the figure of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if we're being literal, right, Jesus is no longer in the scene, right? And so they're moving beyond the confines of Jerusalem into now the world, which is the new commandment, right? That Jesus gave to the apostles, the first 12 apostles, right? To go into the world and make disciples, right? So if we begin to then analyze movement, they're moving from Jerusalem to other parts of, in this case, the Greek Empire. They're moving beyond their immediate experience.
Right.
This is really important because when we begin to engage in biblical studies, and again, anybody that opens a Bible to some extent is already engaging in some form of exegetical, hermeneutical engagement, if they are aware of that or not, right? But what does that mean? It means that we're moving through these texts that we are reading, parting from our own social location and positionality.
Yep.
right? So there's no such thing as trying to read a text objectively.
Mm-hmm.
We are reading the text based on, for example, in my case, as an Afro-Caribbean, right? A person who has graduate studies in theology, who in its identity identifies as queer, free thinker, and let's keep adding, right? So when I engage the text, out of the get-go, I'm already looking for specific things.
Yep.
So there's a shift, there's a movement in how I'm engaging with the text.
Right.
The way that then I am being and forming myself through the text births out of a dialogue.
Yeah.
Right? So I am not just reading, I'm actually conversing with the text.
Yep.
And this is where the hermeneutical lens kicks in.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then the last one, in whom we move, exist, and have our being. I kind of did a play, right? And put in the existence at the end instead of the second one, but existing.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge, huge question for the philosophers of old.
Right, being. Right? Yep, absolutely.
What does it mean to be?
Yep.
Is it just through thought? Is it, for example, through imagery? Right? If we get into a dialogue of semiotics, right? The symbol is the symbol, as you were quoting Seuss, right? Is Seuss just the word Seuss? Is it the representation within the temple?
Yep.
Or is it my own visual representation of Seuss, right? And all these three become present when we're engaging text. And I just want us to keep that in mind as we continue to engage the next few verses, because it is vital for us, again, to have this understanding that there were authors that were writing in a particular time and space, including a geographical location, right? So we need to have that awareness, because if not, then we would be engaging more in an allegorical interpretation, because we are not being grounded in a social historical understanding or framework. So we're just, from our own experience, we're just extrapolating from the get-go, what am I understanding, right? And that can definitely be dangerous, as some of us could attest, right? That's a lot of the practices that sometimes rises up in, let's say, maybe theologically illiterate people, right? That they're just reading that text, they're extrapolating it with their immediate context, their immediate experience, and this is the word of God for the people of God, and this is what it is, right? So it is really important to pay attention to authorship, to audience, and particularly to the goal or the purpose of that text.
Right.
That particular sequence of author, audience, and then purpose.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And and one of the interesting things, Anthony, I mean, so hermeneutics is the way you read a text. So the King James Version of the Bible, which is the one I grew up with, and was the basis of American Protestantism for 200 or 300 years, in there. 1611 is when it was published. Didn't have footnotes. Historically, the reason it didn't have footnotes is because the Puritans had been hiding subversive material in the footnotes. So this is the King James Version. King James does not want secret messages to the revolutionaries in the footnotes. So he says, yes, you Puritans, go translate this thing, but guess what? No footnotes. So, and then for all these years, then people are reading this and they have no footnotes. So clearly in the text, it says, live, move, have a being, that's in quotes. So Paul is quoting this, but who the heck is he quoting? And of course, how did some outback preacher in 1911 know? There was no way to know, right? They weren't educated. There were no theology schools for the Methodists and the Baptists and and so they didn't even know what they were saying actually. But they are talking about. Paul is being very careful to make a quote, right? So let's go back to the script here, to the text, and look a little bit further. So this first quote, "In him we live and move and have our being," it's from this poet, Posidonius, who was a Stoic non-Christian, okay? He's talking about Zeus there, and that's very important to notice. Also, this guy was a mathematician, all right? Paul goes on in the black here, as even some of your own poets have said. So your own poets, right? So back to you guys, the Greek poets that you like. This guy said this, "For we too are his offspring." And this was said by a Turkish poet who lived 315 to 240 before the Common Era by the name of Herodotus. We have his text with us. Still, it wasn't destroyed in the Dark Ages, all right? So for we too are his offspring. So already these Stoic Greek philosophers and poets were talking about a monotheism of the sort that encompassed all living things. And that's very important to understand that this, even though we think that's a Christian concept, it's not. It's a very late antiquity Greek idea. So Paul goes on to say, "Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man," that's interesting, a man, "whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead." Doesn't mention Jesus whatsoever, but that is, of course, who he's referring to. And notice that it is reported, as the Unitarians would love it, as a man, right, who somehow popped up from the dead, though, all right? When they heard, but here you get the Greek skepticism. When they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." But the Greeks did not. And this is another misnomer, that everyone in the ancient world believed in supernaturalism and magic and all of this. Well, educated Greeks and Romans did not believe in the supernatural in this time period. So the resurrection of the dead was total nonsense as far as they were concerned. We'll finish this up, and I want to show us thing, and then we'll pop back. At that point, Paul left them, but some of them joined him and became believers, including Dionysius the Areopagite. That's important because an Areopagite is someone who lives in this area, who's very important, and a woman named Damaris and others with them. Notice the Lukean tendency to mention women. And this is one of the oddities of both the Gospel of Luke and also the book of Acts, is that women are always there, leadership roles, seeing things, doing things. And again, there's been all kinds of speculation as to why that is the truth. Now, I do want to share with you, before we go back here, hymn to Zeus. One of the things that isn't noticeable, again, because there are no footnotes in the King James Version, is that the early Christian hymns and poetry often were just simply stealing from Greek and Roman originals. So this is a Greek text that is a hymn to Zeus. And let's just listen to it and think about it for a moment, how the Christians would just pop in another name. Zeus is the first. Zeus is the last. Alpha and Omega, right? We've heard that before. The god with the dazzling lightning. Zeus is the head. Zeus is the middle. Of Zeus, all things have their end. Zeus is the foundation of the earth and the starry sky. You see how this, this is a monotheistic God. Zeus is male. Zeus is an immortal woman. Zeus is the breath of all things. Zeus is the sweep of unwearying flame. Zeus is the roots of the sea. Zeus is the sun and moon. Zeus is the king. Zeus is the beginner of all things, the god with the dazzling lightning, for he has hidden all things within himself, all-encompassing God, right? And brought them forth again into the joyful light from his sacred heart, working marvels. And this from the Orpheacum Fragmenta, a fragment of an Orpheus hymn here. So you see how the Christians can simply take Stoic writing from this time period and slap in the Hebrew and Christian gods, and by golly, they come up with basically the same thing. Well, let's go back here now and see if we can get, there's Anthony on the line here. And so, yeah, the reading this with a hermeneutic of suspicion here, we can say that it's, the Christians without the footnotes have been hornswoggled over the years to think this is one thing when it's really quite something different, actually. Right.
Before you go much further, you guys have used a lot of big words, and I think it would be quite beneficial. Can you give a quick? We did a little bit at the very beginning, but we had some YouTube trouble, and we got now a pretty large audience now joining us. So, can you give another breakdown of what you mean when you say the word hermeneutics?
Yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
Sure. So hermeneutics would be the method that is utilized to interpret or engage text.
Mm-hmm.
And within hermeneutics, it could be written text as well as interpreting anything that requires human interaction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's a way, it's the way you go about reading it, in other words.
Yes.
Right. So, for example, one of the jokes, the University of Chicago theology department is one of the great ones in the world. Meadville Lombard, the UU seminary, has sent students there for generations now. And in the faculty handbook with phone numbers for faculty, one of the jokes has always been that there is a hermeneutic who is a professor at the University of Chicago. Well, of course, there is no hermeneutic. They're just making a joke about hermeneutics, which is what you learn in terms of how to read this. So, my grandparents were picking up the King James Version of the Bible, and their hermeneutic was that this is the truth, right? This is the absolute truth. They were reading it without footnotes. They had no idea about any of the background. So Paul here, in their mind, is beating these smarty Greek guys, right? But with the hard truth of Christianity. But actually, that's not what he's doing at all. He is subsuming. He's taking the Greek stuff and slapping it in and saying, I know this stuff too, and I can spout it back to you, and it actually is saying the truth. They just got the God wrong. And let me tell you how to correct that. Paul knew very well that the Stoics were monotheistic. That wasn't a surprise to him. So he's taking their Zeus worship of the time and saying, let's put this Hebrew God in its place, and his son, this Christian, because Christianity didn't even have a name yet, right? It's a Jewish sect at this time period, right? So chat in if you have another question about hermeneutics. It's a way that you go about reading the text, basically, and there are many ways to do that. We are reading it from a humanist perspective, which means that we are reading it as literature.
Yes.
As interesting literature, and we will get the truth out of it and the beauty out of it. We're not reading it from an atheist hermeneutics, which just will want to say how silly it is, or how many contradictions there are. That's sometimes fun too, but the real thing is the beauty of how this is being done, right? So, and definitely ask us questions, and Justice pop in with some questions when we have it. So Paul was Paul of, does everyone remember their Sunday school? Tarsus. Tarsus, of course, is a city, and there was a university there that was a Stoic university. So Paul was a Hebrew scholar. He was a Jew. He knew Hebrew scriptures that had been translated into Greek. We have to quickly tell people that the Septuagint was a Greek translation, right? So he was reading a particular hermeneutic already. It was the Greek, the Greek understanding of the Hebrew. And then he was a Stoic, trained as a Stoic philosopher in all this beautiful poetry that the Stoics were writing. And so he's going to mix this together, and that's how Christianity gets created. It's not St. Peter. Paul is this guy who's living at the crux of two different civilizations, right? The Greek and the Hebrew, and he's putting them together in this magical way, and that's what Christianity is, right? So,
yeah, David, and I mean, I would say that if we kind of deconstruct a little bit or simplify what you're stating, right? Already in these few verses that we're exploring, we have already talked about being bicultural. Mm-hmm. We're already talking about the clashing and intermingling of Jewish civilization and the up and coming Greek culture. Right? And how they're already being intertwined in order to better communicate with each other. Right. So as you just quoted, Paul is basically reframing, he's basically reinterpreting Greek poetry, Greek knowledge to the Greeks in order to make a point.
Right. Well, and I mean, that's kind of the project of Christianity too, right? They're going to go back and they're going to read the Hebrew Bible. They're going to say, oh, look, this prophet is talking about Jesus. Well, look, this passage is about Jesus. Look, they're always predicting Jesus. How did they do that? Well, they didn't, right? You just start stuffing this stuff in there, and you can come up with a completely different conclusion, of course. I mean, Jews today don't think it's that way either. That's only one hermeneutic. It was a hermeneutic of Christianity reading the Old Testament, quote unquote, and that's why it's the Old Testament. It's the old stuff, and now we've got the new stuff. It's a sleight of hand, really, but it's a brilliant sleight of hand, of course, right?
Yeah, and I think at least for me, as a free-thinking theologian, that there is this responsibility to really understand scriptures. Mm-hmm. Why? Because if we are positioned or socially located within North America, the Judeo-Christian frameworks or Bible or hermeneutic is already entrenched, is already part of the nature and fabric of this society. Even if we say that we are fill in the blank, right? Critics or atheist, agnostic, whatever term we want to use, right? Putting ourselves in a position to Christian dominance, but it still informs the social imaginary of our society.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that. I'm glad that I got this beaten into me as a kid, frankly, because you can understand American culture a lot better if you know this stuff and how it has been hermeneutically read by Protestants over time. And we have a question in the chat. Is this synchrony? In our Coffee and Wisdom in the mornings, we've been talking this week about synchrony. That is the putting together of different strains of religion. Absolutely. Because look what you've got here. You have this ancient Hebrew stuff, right, that's been out there for 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years, right? And then you've got this new idea of Christianity. But guess what? You've also got Zoroastrianism that is coming in from Persia, which was one of the powerhouses of the day. And what is in Zoroastrianism but an afterlife? So, the ancient Jews had no idea of an afterlife, but guess what? Hey presto, Christians do, because it's a new idea that's coming through. Jerusalem was at the end of the Silk Road. I mean, it's coming to the Mediterranean. And then we got Paul of Tarsus up there on the eastern side of the Mediterranean, and now we're in Greece, which is surrounded by by water and not too far from Rome. So all of this stuff is mixing together. Hebrew, Zoroastrianism, these new ideas of Christianity, maybe Buddhism. We still don't really know how deeply that had come in. But I mean, the camels were going through there too. I mean, it was a trade route of the Silk Road, so that was there. And then all of the so-called pagan religions that had existed around the Mediterranean for years, which include ancient Egypt. So you're going 8,000 years back suddenly in some of these understandings. The idea of the soul is an Egyptian idea ultimately. The Coptic cross is an Egyptian symbol, not a Christian symbol. So it's all synchrony going on here. Look up what the different cultures were thinking of owls, from wisdom to death to, enlightenment, all of these things. It's just absolutely amazing. Yes, how these were done. So, yeah.
So, David, we have hit 7:38. I have a whole crowd of 12 people in the Zoom meeting all ready to listen in to the conversation with you.
All right.
So I think that it's 7:38. Let's go ahead and call it. Thank you so much all for attending Bibles and Beer this Wednesday. Next Wednesday, we will be meeting again.
Hey.
David, do we have a topic?
Oh no, but you know what? We will have Wendy back next week, and so she has some very interesting high-level looks at Scripture, and she's a Bible scholar par excellence, and we'll see what she has to say. So.
Woot!
Yay!
So let's go ahead and thanks all. We will catch you
next.
next.
Yep, bye-bye.
Next Wednesday. Bye-bye.